thank you all for joining today's webinar, File Analysis and Records Management, a Match Made in Heaven. We appreciate you joining us today. The first thing I would like to do is take a moment and introduce our speakers. My name is Maya Woldridge, and I'm the Business Development Representative here at Gimmal. Today, I'm joined by our key speaker, Dean Meisenheimer, our Director of Sales Engineering. Before we get started, I've got a few housekeeping items to go through. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, feel free to submit them in the Q&A section on the screen, and we'll answer as many of those as we have time for at the end of the presentation. There will also be a poll question that you will see pop up, so please keep an eye out for that as well. And as always, if you have any technical difficulties, please let us know so that we can assist you. To kick things off, I'd like to take the next couple of slides to tell you a little bit about Gimmal and how we can help you take control of your information with our suite of solutions. Founded in 2002, Gimmal is a records, information management, and governance software company that helps you balance the value your information provides with the risk it also presents. Whether you are trying to discover information in unstructured data sources, migrate from legacy systems, or comply with policies across multiple repositories, Gimmal can help you achieve your information governance goals. We have a client success team and global network of partners that deliver solutions in conjunction with key partners like Microsoft and SAP. Gimmal's family of software products work together to let you create an efficient digital workplace. Our comprehensive solutions include migration, file analysis, electronic and physical records management, and document management for SAP. For those of you who are not new to our webinars, you may have noticed a slight name change in our products. They are the same solutions, just with a more simplified name for easier reference. And now I would like to go ahead and hand it off to Dean to get started with today's presentation.
Thank you, Maya. So let's jump into the meat of the presentation here. And as always, as we go through the slides, type your questions into the Q&A panel, and we'll make sure we get to as many as we can at the end. So, unstructured data, I don't think it's a secret to anybody that unstructured data is a challenge. When you look out across your network, you look at the various network file systems that you have out there, there are terabytes, or in some clients we speak with, even petabytes, right? They're up to a petabyte of information scattered across their network. And that's content that has just sat out there and grown and literally, I use the term smoldered over years. It's just been sitting out there, right? And you don't know if it's active, you don't know if it's used. And on top of that, then you have users' local drives, right? The size of storage on personal devices has continued to grow. And so, what are users now storing on their local machines that in the past they may have had to store out on the network somewhere? As part of that information stored on the local drives, there may be information like PST files, right? PST files, if I can save my inbox and Outlook out to a PST file, and that saves all my emails and all my subfolders and all the attachments and all those emails and all those subfolders. And as I move from machine to machine, or as I move from company to company, I can take that PST file with me. And I'm not necessarily doing that for malicious reasons. I'm doing it because it has information of examples of work I've done, things I may want to reference in the future. But the problem is, you don't know what information is now entered your network through things like PST files, and does that create some potential exposure for you? And then there's SharePoint, right? SharePoint on premise, in a lot of cases, was rolled out over the years, whether it was, starting all the way back in the 2007 days or 2010 on through. In a lot of cases, it was rolled out just as a collaboration tool with a lot of planning or forethought. And so over time, information was just kind of put in there. Nothing was ever put under retention. Nothing was ever disposed of. And it's become another bit of a black hole of data out there on your network. And the problem is, the numbers are scary. And it's not just us saying it. These numbers come from some various Gartner reports that we've had access to. And, the first one is really kind of eye-opening. It's 40 to 80% of the files in a typical enterprise are redundant, obsolete, or trivial, outdated or trivial, rot, as it's commonly referred to. Between 40 and 80%. That's a lot of information, especially if you have hundreds of terabytes of information out there. And the bad news is it's not getting any better, it's getting worse, right? By 2024, the amount of unstructured data is going to triple in the average enterprise. When you look at what's on file systems, in content management systems, out on the cloud, right? There's a lot of information that's continuing to be created and added. And so it's just adding to the problem. And if you don't get an information governance program in place that includes unstructured data alongside your structured and semi-structured data, the risk of failure goes way up. Right? So those are pretty eye-opening numbers. File systems are one of the biggest challenges. Every client that we talk to, about records management, they're looking to get their records under control. They're looking to either modernize or implement for the first time a formal records management program. Every one of them is like, yeah, we're moving, we've got Microsoft 365 and things are organized and life is great, but we've also got file systems. And the file systems are a challenge just because of the volume of information and the lack of structure that's out there. You've heard me mention petabytes. How big is a petabyte? Well, think about the laptop sitting on your desk. Maybe it has a 256 gig drive in it, or maybe it has a 512 gig drive in it, which, is a huge amount of storage compared to, even 5 years ago or 10 years ago. Well, if your laptop has a pretty good sized disk, if it has 512 gig storage in it, you need 2,000 of those laptops to reach a petabyte. It's a lot of information, right? Or another way to look at it is 20 million 4-drawer filing cabinets all filled with text. Right? It's a lot of information. And figuring out what's out there becomes a massive challenge because there's a lot of times there's no structure, right? Users are kind of left to their own devices. I haven't been at many organizations, many companies, either as a vendor or as an employee, where there was a formal process and policy for how you named things on the file system. Think about it. So you wind up with these, documents out there called, bob-project-sched.xls in a folder called u/project/bob. That's one file, one example. Multiply that now times thousands or millions, right? And so how do you get your arms and how do you organize and how do you analyze what's out there and get your arms around that? And then there's limited information, right? Beyond the path to where the file is and the modified date and maybe the file size, you don't know a lot about information on a file system. There's just limited data there. And then what contributes to the problem is age and attrition. People retire. People move to new roles in the company. People move to other companies. So the person that created the u/projects folder may not be at the company anymore. So who knows what's in all of those project folders? And who's going to take the time to go through all of that and review it all? And that's where remediation comes in, right? What is it and how do we address it? Well, to get a little academic for a moment, the Oxford Dictionary defines remediation as a verb, to remediate. And I'm not going to go through all the tenses of it, but basically it's about providing a remedy for redressing or making something right. That's what remediation is. That's what it is when it's applied to file systems and to unstructured content. How do I fix this problem? Manual classification isn't the answer. Asking your users to go out and clean up the U drive or asking them to go out and clean up their inbox, right, and all of their subfolders. You're going to have extremely mixed success and probably low success, to be quite frank, just because it takes time. Think about just your own C drive. When was the last time you really went through all of the folders on your C drive in your My Documents and looked at what was there and did some house cleaning? For me, it's been a while. So doing manual classification, it's tedious, it's time consuming. You have to have some knowledge of what the content is. So back to our use/projects folder. If I don't know what it is, I may not even be able to analyze it and make a good idea of it. That's where file analytics come in. File analytics let us begin to automate the process of looking at that information. Gartner describes it really well. File analysis products analyze, index, search, track, and report on file metadata and file content so that you can take action on the files according to what was identified. It automates that whole process of looking out across your data sources, of digging into the files, of looking for concepts and terms and patterns and combining that with location and age and giving you an idea of here's what you have. With SaaS-based tools, like Gimmal Discover, I can quickly deploy an analytics platform and be able to go out and begin analyzing my SharePoint sites, my email, my file systems. Right? I can quickly deploy the connections into those data sources and begin analysis and get information back so that I can take action in an intelligent way, in an informed way. The types of analysis that I may want to be able to do on that content, I may want to come in and just simply do age-based analysis, right? Show me everything on my file share that's over 5 years old, or show me everything in SharePoint that was created more than 3 years ago, or last modified more than 3 years ago. Or more importantly, one of the most useful pieces of information, when was the last time something was accessed? Maybe it was created 10 years ago, but it was accessed 2 days ago. So somebody's still using it. It's still active information. But other information was created 5 years ago and it hasn't been accessed in 4 years and 11 months. Right? That's probably rot right at this point. Or I can begin doing expression and term-based analysis. As I go through and I look into documents, am I finding expressions and terms like medical records, or HIPAA, or vendor ID, or contract end date, right? That's going to give me a good indication of what type of information is. If I see the term HIPAA in a document, it very well may be a medical record. Or if I see the term vendor ID or FOB, it's probably an invoice or a purchase order. Right? I can begin to make those types of connections. Or depending on the industry you're in, depending on the type of products you make, or if you work in government, there may be information that's considered sensitive. Maybe I want to go out and I want to search and look for information that relates to products that are under development, or new drugs that are under development. Or I want to look for confidential, unclassified information, what's typically referred to as CUI. Or I want to start looking for patterns. I need to go out and find every document that contains a social security number or a tax ID number or a social information number, right? To see if it relates to personal information. Or I want to go out and find any documents that have patterns that match credit card numbers. So I can begin to discover that information, right? That's where pattern matching comes into play. And then based on that, I may take some actions, right? Through file analytics, Gimmal Discover gives me the ability, I can move something, I can delete something, I can even compress files if they're over a certain size if I want to. So I can begin to take action as part of the analysis in addition to just generating reports. And so what happens is I start to get context, right? That's where I begin to see now, here's what I've got. So as I get insight into the information, now I can make better decisions about what to do with that information. I know the value of the information, so I know how to manage it, how to retain it, and how to dispose of it. And those are all three very important concepts, right? How do I manage it? How long do I keep it? And what do I need to do to legally dispose of it, right, in case I get called into court? So there's typically what I call high and low value content, right? What's the value of this content? If it's on a file system, but it's high value content, should I move it someplace like Microsoft 365 so it's more secure, it's backed up, it's accessible 24/7. Or if it's low value content, but I still need to keep it around, do I leave it on file systems? Do I put it on cheaper storage rather than high performance storage? Right? Those are all some of the decisions you can begin to make. Is it rot? Can I just delete a large swath of it, right? If I've got 100 terabytes out there and 60% of it's determined to be rot, I've just freed up a lot of storage space. Or, yes, I can delete it, but I need to keep it for a period of time first. And when I do delete it, I need to do it in a more structured fashion. I need to do it under a more kind of formal record disposition, even though I may only need to keep it for another year or so. And which of these things are records? Can I begin to figure out what's a record, what needs to be retained and classified, right? What should be moved into a more secure repository and managed there as a record? What can stay on the file system but still needs to be managed under formal record retention policy? And what information might eventually need to be archived? Right. If you're in, again, certain industries, or you are in, government, you may need to submit content at the end of its life cycle out to an archive, right? So how do you manage that process as well? And so that's where managing records begins to come in. Getting your information under control. Do you have a retention schedule? Right. So as you begin to look at deploying a records management solution, the first thing you look at is, do I have a retention schedule? You might. It might be a retention schedule that was left over from physical records management days and could have, 1, 2, 3,000 record classifications in it. It might be a good time to optimize as you look to apply that to electronic records as well, because you could still have both physical and electronic records. Right? So it might be a good time to optimize. Second, are you going to manage your records in place, or are you going to migrate them all to one repository? Picking up and moving everything into a single repository is a great goal, but it's incredibly difficult to pull off. Right? I used the analogy the other day when I was talking with a client, and they actually used it as well. It's like moving houses. And when you're packing up to move to the new house, you've always got that junk drawer or that junk closet. And you should clean it out before you move. But now you get in a time crunch and you just dump it in a box. You get to the new house, you dump it out of the box back into the new junk drawer. And all you've done is take the disorganized mess from one place to another. You can do that with the cloud also. If you just take a file share that's totally disorganized, hasn't been cleaned up, you haven't analyzed it, and you just dump that into the cloud, you're not any better off, except now it's in the cloud. So, look at migrating what makes sense. Look at migrating what's high value and what should be migrated. Things maybe that shouldn't be, leave them in place and do in-place records management. And then lastly, as you're looking to move this information into a repository, into Microsoft 365, for example, do you have an information architecture set up to receive it? Do you have metadata? Do you have properties? Do you have a structure of how sites are going to be set up? So where do we begin, right? Well, the first is think about your classification schema, and that's different than your retention schedule, right? The reason I say that is my retention schedule tells me what my buckets are, how my records will be classified, how long they should be kept, right? What justifies that. My classification schema is, how am I going to decide what goes into which record class, into which category? So as I put my information into SharePoint Online, or as I reorganize it on my file system, or maybe as I put it into other locations, right? How is that information going to be used to map to my retention schedule? How am I going to drive that classification? Right? Is it going to be just around properties, metadata, or will it be a combination maybe of location? Because on a file system, I don't have metadata, but I do have location. In SharePoint, I've got both, so maybe it becomes a combination. Use the analysis tools. right? To label, to move, to delete things, to organize your content so that you can get better record management results. Even on the file share, and I'll show you some examples here in a moment, I can actually classify and label things so that records management can have a little more information about what something is, even though it's on a file share. If you're using Microsoft 365 and you are moving information into SharePoint Online, take advantage of SharePoint syntax, right? The machine learning and AI tools that Microsoft provides, right? Gimmal's a preferred partner in the Content Services program, and it can help you deploy syntax, set up the machine learning models so that it can provide better information around your content so that now Gimmal records can put better classification and better retention around that information. And automate the records management, right? If you can get the end users kind of out of the records management business, your success rate will go up. So if you can automate how records are classified and just have that happen in the context of the business process based on location and metadata and content type or object type, right? Your chances of success are way higher because you're not having to train users to be records managers. You as the records manager can set that up. End users can kind of focus on their job and everything just happens automatically in the background. So let me show you a few examples of kind of how this can all come together. This is a screenshot of Gimmal Migrate. Gimmal Migrate, sorry, not Gimmal Migrate, Gimmal Discover, excuse me. Gimmal Discover allows me to reach out and connect to different data sources in the organization. And the first thing I can do is run a search and discover all of the potential data targets that I can run analytics against. Here's a list of all the network file shares out there that I could go out and run analytics on, including locations on a personal laptop, my laptop. Well, once I've run that search, now I can set up analytic policies. And the different policies can hit different data targets. I can pick and choose which ones I want to analyze. I can then go out and run those analytics, looking at age-based or pattern-based. And when I run my analytics, what happens is I can generate reports. So I can begin to see what information I have. And those reports begin to give me the visibility that I'm looking for. So now I can run a report and say, go out and look at the file system and bring back a report that shows every document that contains a combination of a social security number and a person's name. And it can tell me, all right, here's the name of the file, here's the path to where that file is, here's the text I found in the file that tells me this has a social security number in it, and here's the last date that that file was accessed. And here's the owner of the file, and here's the hash value if you want to go out and identify duplicates. So now I know what this information is in my different locations. I can make a decision on, can I delete this? Do I leave it in place? Do I need to move it? Right? Because I now have visibility into what that information is. And more importantly, for file system content, I can begin to classify and label that content. So as I do my analytics, if I have content I'm going to leave on the file system, but I want to bring it under records management control, Discover allows me to look into the content, use that example I talked about earlier, look for certain terms, right, or strings of words together, and say, oh, I think this document's a contract. I'm going to label it that way. I think this document is an invoice. I'm going to label it that way. And that label information that Gimmal Discover adds becomes information that can now be used by Gimmal Records to begin doing the classification and records management on that content. So now I can take my retention schedule, I can implement it into Gimmal Records, I can have my different categories of records and my different record classes and my retention lifecycle set up on those record classes. And so now I can do things like, oh, I've got in the center of the screen there, PUR03, my purchasing invoices records. Well, anything I found on the file system that I think is an invoice, I've labeled as an invoice. And now Gimmal Records can pick that label up from Gimmal Discover, invoice PO there at the very top, and use that to help better classify the record and assign the right retention to it. So now, based on it being an invoice, even though it's on the file system, we know exactly where it is on the file system. We've given it a unique record ID. We know the title of the record. We've assigned it to the correct record class. And as a result, it's now fallen under our finance records 6-year retention lifecycle. So it'll wait out its lifecycle at the end of 6 years. It'll be eligible for disposition. If you want to know a little more, feel free to, if you go out on our website to blog.gimmal.com, we've got a lot of great blogs. Here are 4 that are kind of relevant to the discussion today, but there's a lot of other great blogs out there. And so with that, we're coming up towards the bottom of the hour. Got one poll question here, which is, would you like to schedule a demonstration of Gimmal Discover and or Gimmal Records? Click yes, or if you don't, click no, not at this time. Someone will follow up with you. And while we wait for everyone to answer the poll questions, Maya, do you want to go ahead and start going through the questions?
Yes, looks like we've got a couple we can go ahead and start with. The first one, are the SaaS analytics based only on the US cloud?
Today we've got primarily U.S. customers, so it's the SaaS environment is hosted in the U.S. On the record side, we have records clients that are in the U.S., U.K. SaaS clients, and so we have tenants in both locations and plans to continue to expand that. So it's more of a matter of kind of customer demand, and where the customers are as to where the SaaS tenants are than anything today.
All right, another question. How is the file analysis from Gimmal different than what is offered from Microsoft 365? I would think being able to conduct the analysis and then easily delete, compress, etc., all in one workflow would be a feature not offered from Microsoft 365.
Yeah, great question. The biggest difference is just in the variety of data sources that Gimmal Discover can connect to. So in addition to SharePoint Online, we can also connect and analyze OneDrive, in the cloud, OneDrive on-prem, SharePoint on-premise, email, both in the cloud and on-prem, email archives, PST files on the local file systems, network file shares, personal drives, and Box as an alternative. So it can run analytics against all of those different data sources, and plus against even an OLADB if you wanted to go out and look, for similar type stuff within a relational database.
Related to that question, can end users easily classify the content after analysis?
They could, because you can, the reports, depending on how you wanted to classify that information, the reports can be exported out to Excel. So you could certainly, do an analysis, provide a report to someone in a business unit and say, this is all your stuff. It's all out here on the file shares. You need to get this, into a more formal structure so that we can put records policy on it, for example.
Another question, are records moved between Gimmal Discovery and Gimmal Records phases, or do they remain in place?
That's a great question. And in both cases, the records stay in place. So, Gimmal Records is an in-place records management. We put the policy on the records in the repository. The analytics is the same. The analysis happens in place on where the content's at rest.
Can Gimmal analysis also identify duplicate files, emails, etc.?
You can. It depends on the content source. So for SharePoint, file systems, OneDrive, yeah, you can grab that hash value. For emails, you can't grab the hash value, so it's a little different. But yeah, you can identify the duplicates and then make a determination, which one to keep, which one's the master, and so forth.
Right, and another one, does Gimmal work with enterprise applications?
It would probably depend on the application, but that might be where the OLADB agent would come into play, so that you could analyze against the database of an enterprise application. If those applications had their own content stores, that's something we'd probably have to dig a little deeper into.
All right. Looks like we're approaching the end of our session here. But let me answer another question here in the chat. After analysis, how can records be moved to SharePoint Online?
Yeah, so migration can be done to SharePoint Online in a few ways. For file system content, Gimmal Migrate can be used to do, you can point it at an area of a file system, migrate content into Microsoft 365 in a pretty automated fashion. Microsoft provides services where content from basically you can do drive shipping and they'll move everything up for you. So there's a number of different ways you can do the migration.
And is a full text index of content created? If so, what kind of index is it?
There is a full text index created. Well, that's an option actually when you do the analysis. You can click a box that says full text index, either all of the files or a subset. And so that full text is just stored in the Gimmal Discover database and is visible there through the report.
Right, I've got a few more questions we'll try to get through.
Great amount of questions.
Yeah, does Gimmal Discovery allow for the query of enterprise applications?
Yeah, I think that kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier. The being able to query the database potentially, or if the enterprise app had its own document store, we'd have to kind of look at how that's structured and set up.
Can analysis be used to move content to SharePoint using rules?
It's not designed to be a migration tool, but you could certainly, during Discover, you can have a policy like move documents from one location to another or copy documents from one location to another. So I guess in theory, you could move it to a folder that's mapped to OneDrive for Business, for example. But really, that would be more where Gimmal Migrate would be a more effective tool, I think, for doing that.
I think this is the last question I've got so far. Can it work with structured content within an application's content store?
Yeah, again, I'm going to kind of go back to, I'm assuming that is the information in the application's database. So if there's an OLADB connection, potentially yes.
All right, that's the last of the questions we have here in the Q&A. If anyone has any more questions, our contact information is here on this next slide. And not a problem. You can also send us an email at info@gimmal.com or just visit our website at www.gimmal.com. And for those interested in a recording of this webinar, we will be sending it out between 24 to 48 hours in the form of a thank you email. We also hope to see you for our next webinar next week called Physical Records Management, a Modern Approach, and that will feature a demonstration of Gimmal Physical. But thank you everyone for joining us today.
Thank you everyone.